According to Stonefruit with Mark French. Today, I want to look at the technocrats of the new disinformation governance regime. Part 1, the role of big tech in academia. And I want to utilize Obama's April 21st speech at Stanford as a kind of case study of how that operates.
Certainly it is.
Yeah, because this guy, he keeps popping up now and then. What would you liken his periodic appearances to?
There's a very unique, strange, special day in this country,
Yes.
in February-ish, where there's a rodent that pops out of the hole to predict the future for everyone.
What is the name of this beloved rodent?
Punxsutawney Phil in good old Pennsylvania.
Punxsutawney Phil.
Yeah, so with Barack Obama, it really is becoming like Groundhog Day, where he pops out of the hole every once in a while to say the same things that he's always said and do the same things that he's always done and say it in a beautiful, interesting way that is supposed to captivate everyone and remind them how brilliant he is and how rich he's getting.
Yes, he is a genial and intelligent neoliberal uberghoul.
Yeah.
And as Punxsutawney Phil periodically pops up from beneath a chilly field in Pennsylvania to announce the arrival of spring or not, so too does post-presidency Obama periodically pop up to give a well-remunerated speech preserving his legacy or girding some weakening fascia of international neoliberal finance capital. That's a quote from my article that this episode will be based on, that you all can go visit at stonefruit.substack.com. And I was pretty proud of that word fascia because it's the same root word as fascism. But what it means is something that holds a joint or a set of bones and ligaments together.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, but it's so close to fascia that the bundle of sticks, that's the traditional icon of fascism. But I think that's what Obama does, is he pops up when neoliberalism needs a bit of strengthening in a certain strategic point.
Sure.
And in this case, in Stanford, it was to declare that disinformation was one of the main challenges of the digital information realm.
Right.
But I think that he was selling approved narratives in the guise of protecting us from disinformation, when disinformation is the only thing that Democrats can conceivably build back better.
That's good.
Thank you. And, you know, every president eventually gets asked, who's your favorite president? And in a nod to his post-partisan branding, Obama says Ronald Reagan.
Of course.
The great communicator. But I think the key difference between the two is that Reagan hit his marks and said his lines with a genial charm that came from decades of being a corporate spokesperson after he was a B movie actor. But he had no curiosity, an imperturbable lack of curiosity as to whether his lines were true or false.
Sure.
But I think part of Obama's eloquence is that it seems to stem from an omnivorous curiosity. So you can't help but think that he knows when he's lying.
Absolutely.
So that I think the value of looking at Obama's speech is not that speech per se, although the topic is of the moment, but it's to look at how ideology operates in late neoliberal finance capital in the United States. And I think Obama knew that he was speaking to two audiences. one is the people that are going to take them at face value, that
Sure.
disinformation is a scourge. And the other is, all right, Obama, you're the best salesman this ideology's had in years. What are you selling? And it was no mistake that it was held at Stanford in what he said in the speech in the heart of Silicon Valley. So big tech was listening. All right, what do you want us to do? What are the marching orders?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's also very important that it was done at Stanford because
Yeah.
I want part of this episode to look at how Ivy League and elite peer institutions like Stanford work to gird up the prevailing ideology that the powers that be want us to believe. And I think they do it in part by how they select their students. They want ones with I have a big background in education and I'm an expert in standards-based education. Here's a phrase you hear a lot: skills, knowledge, and dispositions. They want students with skills, knowledge, and dispositions that are amenable for them to serve as technocrats of neoliberal capitalism.
Absolutely.
And they don't want any evidence of critical thought that dissents from the conventional wisdom, the consensus reality of empire on
Yeah.
any matter of any sensitivity. That's weeded out during admission. Coursework doesn't cultivate that, or resilience or resourcefulness or initiative or curiosity. Neither does evaluation. And it's no surprise to me that about half of the graduates of these schools at the apex of the prestige pyramid, they all go into finance, consulting, or law because they don't really know what else to do.
They really are only recruiting cheerleaders and systems managers.
Systems
There's
managers, the
That's
word
right.
I would use is technocrats.
Yeah.
Uh, they've never cultivated a passion, and they're just, well, I'm going to earn a good living. No one's going to be mad at me or said I made a bad choice if I go into these fields.
Right.
You know, I've been trying to figure out the number. Occupy was really hung up on the 1%,
Yeah.
and I think that's a good place to start. But I think it might be more like the 0.01% is the really big money, the ancient banking dynasties, the Araviste wealthy like Bezos and Musk.
Sure.
So that's small. And then it's the 0.99% that are the technocrats
Yeah.
of neoliberalism. And I
Right.
think that those are the people that go to Davos. Those are the people that graduate from Ivy League and Stanford.
Yeah.
They're specialists in one minuscule area.
Hmm.
And I'm a huge exponent of broad liberal arts education. Let's learn to think well, speak well, read well, write well. But graduates of these institutions are not.
No.
They're not taught or even given the idea that it might be a valuable idea to think broadly about society and culture in an interconnected way, let alone any facility with it. But the students know that their diplomas will be golden passports to the highest echelons of wealth, power, and prestige in this system. But any abiding concern that this system is omnicidal and predicated on endless war, ecological devastation, domestic repression, and wholesale social immiseration will never trouble their sleep.
That's right.
And professors know that they don't need to burnish their resumes anymore because no further status climbing is possible.
Right.
So that's who was in the room when Obama gave his speech. But people that, unlike your faithful correspondent who watched it twice, people that saw it in the news on blue MAGA legacy media, like members of the Democratic Party's new base, since they've abandoned labor, the predominantly white suburban professional managerial class.
That's right.
All those people, the people in the building, the people watching it on the news, watching it online, they all understand subconsciously that their continuous upward mobility in their career paths and various hierarchies is dependent upon the extent to which they can regurgitate the conventional ideology. They don't worry about the ennui, the anomie.
Yeah, right.
Anomie is a sociological foundational classic from the French pioneer Durkheim.
That's right.
That's like 100.
Emile Durkheim. Yeah,
That's like 140 years old. It's still relevant.
right.
Add
Absolutely.
add to that depression, lack of social connection, free floating
Yeah,
anger and
so
anxiety.
it's culturally so nihilistic that it has to turn inward. An inward cannibalism, a self cannibalism out of nihilism.
Yeah, and you know who I look to for a lot on this topic is NYU social psychologist Jonathan Haidt,
Sure.
The Coddling of the American Mind. And he just had a piece in The Atlantic that's been getting a lot of publicity that it's titled "The Last 10 Years Have Been Uniquely Stupid."
And how?
And he uses this last decade on purpose because, as we mentioned in a previous episode of the Hardline, according to Stonefruit, it was in 2012 that Facebook had its IPO. So,
Oh,
so that's a handy marker to say
it
when
is.
social media became universal.
Sure.
And he's a social scientist, so he looks at the data and he says that especially among Gen Z, the youth, that incidences of uh, depression, self-harm, anxiety, suicidal ideation, they go up on the chart like a hockey stick starting in 2012.
That's not surprising.
Yeah. And this is the granular social effect of neoliberalism, that the graduates of Ivy League and elite peers, they don't think about how bad the system is, but they don't think about that effect on the personal level of the people around them either,
Right.
because they're not given a liberal education to have the wherewithal to be able to think that way.
Yeah.
So if we think that Obama was speaking to two audiences, one accepted his truth, that disinformation was one of the worst challenges facing democracy in the digital information realm. The other knew he was a salesman. So the way I figured out that, Mark, hold on to your hat, that this man was lying to us.
Really? Is that
Yeah, I
possible?
listened to the first time just to get the flow, and I listened to the second
Sure.
time and put down about 3 dozen notes. And my first and my last, there are two big
It's really,
whoppers.
it really is what you have to do with him, though, right? I mean, seriously, it's hard to get past originally how he's saying it because you immediately want to just lay down and agree because he's so rhythmic, he's so fakely sincere,
Yeah,
obviously brilliant,
yeah,
obviously charming, knows where to hit the humor notes,
yes,
real human being that you want to sit down and have a beer with. And then the only way to really get how terrifying and weird and harmful it could be
yep,
is to block all of that out and be like, wait a second, what did he just say? And
yes.
then that's where you can really begin to see, like, this is a very dangerous person that's not being helpful at all.
You nailed it. And that's exactly what I hope the Hardline According to Stonefruit can do, is to cultivate within its listeners the ability to decode ideology and how it works.
Yeah.
Because like you say, he's genial, he's handsome, he's well spoken, and you brought up humor. He knows exactly where and when and how to spice it. I'll give you two examples. Uh, he made a little joke, as any boomer would. Sometimes I have to have the girls tell me how to operate basic functions on my phone. And another one was,
Yeah.
and we're overwhelmed with this information sphere of conspiracy theory and lies and quackery and cat videos. I was just waiting when he was going to throw in cat videos, and sure enough, it made it
Of
his
course. Yeah.
made appearance.
He has a way to do the playing it straight Chevy Chase thing without being an O for a goof.
Yeah, absolutely. He's very slick. He's not the physical comedian and pratfaller that Chevy Chase is.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
But let's look at his two big lies at the front and at the back of his speech. The first one, this is a quote. Well, Russia's invasion of Ukraine is, quote, a nuclear armed despot's response to a neighboring state whose only provocation is its desire to be independent and democratic. I hope our listeners might be drawn to us because they already know the gist of why that's not true.
Yeah.
Independent? My
Right.
God, Ukraine is a plaything of the Ukrainian oligarchs, the IMF, the CIA. CIA cut out the National Endowment for Democracy.
Absolutely.
And it's not democratic. It's
Yeah.
obviously the most corrupt country in Europe.
Yeah.
Its per capita GDP is lower than it was when the Soviet Union broke up.
Right.
And we don't even really need to go into the dense and long-standing matrix of provocations from the United States and NATO, the proxies like the Azov Battalion, and the politicians that, with the Azovs, all worship World War II Nazi collaborator Stepan Bandera as their patron saint.
Yeah.
So he's lying. He's lying, Mark.
Yeah.
But then his second, well, not his second, there's a lot of lies in between. That's why I call this a lie sandwich. Towards the end, he says, quote, that Russia's control of information has led public opinion further and further and further and further away from the facts. There was actually 4 furthers in that.
Right.
And he said, making it a cardinal example of, quote, what happens when society lose track of what is true, which is exactly what the disinformation governance regime is trying to impose on us.
Yeah. True according to who?
Exactly. And then he finished up his closing whopper by alleging that Russia had lost a quarter of the country's combat power.
Yeah.
Now, you tell me how one of the world's most formidable militaries, leading a special military operation in its near abroad with supply lines in its sovereign territory,
Yeah.
could have lost a quarter of its combat power. There's no way.
It's not possible. Yeah.
There's no metric by which that is possible.
Preposterous.
But what he's saying about how Russia's controlling their information system is a neo-fucking liberal wet dream about how they want to control America's information system.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
And you remember when Colin Powell was dispatched to go sell Gulf War 2.0 at the UN,
Yeah.
he had George Tenet right behind him.
Right.
And the visual implication was that the CIA and the intelligence community backs up everything that Powell is saying.
Sure.
Well, Obama had a former Obama administration ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul,
Yeah.
in the front row while he was giving that speech, telling the audience that anything he's saying against Russia must be true. Here's an ambassador sitting right here.
Mm-hmm.
But I think big tech was listening. What's the tacit threat? What does he want us to do?
Yeah.
And as we'll get into it, but I think they saw early that it was that they unless that they would let the government inspect their algorithms to make sure that they were censoring who the government wanted them to censor,
Yeah.
big tech would risk losing its liabilities under section 2 having its liability waiver under section 230 of the
So that they could be sued. Yeah, that's exactly right. So that they could be held financially liable for things that get put out on the platform, as if they were a publisher and not a curator.
right, or have limitations put on the type and amount of data that they can sell,
Yeah.
just to have their money be fucked with unless this government can sneak a peek at their algorithms. Not, God forbid, have open source algorithms like Musk has said he might do for Twitter.
Sure.
So, as we've discussed before, I think it's a war between the China Russia bloc emerging and the quote unquote liberal order, the Bretton Woods order. And this latter order, they keep using words like democracy and security and prosperity and free speech and free thought. And what a salesman like
The opposite.
exactly what a salesman wants you to believe is that those words are what actually ob- obtain in a world of hyper surveilled debt peonage
That's right.
in an anti-human information war.
Yeah.
And further, he wants to claim a universal validity for exactly that type of system.
Right.
And he wants to hide any trace of globalization as a self-consciously created instrument of global class war.
Yeah.
One of my favorite public intellectuals, Thomas Frank, I love the mocking tone that he often refers to how the disinformation governance regime, the powers that be, refer to globalization. He'll do this beatnik slam poetry type of voice. You can't mess with globalization. It's like the weather. And that's exactly how they keep framing it when it was specific concrete choices and legal agreements that were signed by people who have names and addresses.
Yeah, that's right.
And the last major thing that Obama has to hide is the permanent war that America's always in, uh, and the war that's coming now against the BRICS plus China Belt and Road countries.
Well, not only that, but no one's talking about Obama's AFRICOM explosion and the African engagements.
Yeah, and what is China doing with Belt and Road in Africa? Building infrastructure, which is to gain the consent of the countries of Africa.
Yeah, that's right.
What is America doing?
Yeah, and I don't want to make a saint out of China here,
No.
right? Like there's nuance and context there. There are numerous stories over and over again that the Africans are being treated terribly by the Chinese. Not any different than Saudis treat the Filipinos or Malaysians, right? So no one's saying that China has all this sorted out, but the Chinese are actually building infrastructure and providing things that do make human life better. So, do they violate human rights all the time? Yes. Are their own citizens committed suicide and jumping off the roofs of Foxconn factories? Yes. Are they sending Uyghurs to re education camps like we did to the Japanese in World War II? Yes. So, no one's trying to make a saint of China or the Chinese way. I think one of the main points that you're making that you can kind of pull out of this is the Chinese social scores and shutting people's money off and spying on people all the time and dealing with dissent as a heavy hand, I think the writing is on the wall that the American state is quite jealous of that, and they're trying to copy it as fast as possible. The Chinese way is Silicon Valley technocracy, just without any impediment to put it into practice immediately.
Yeah, I think the digital currency that can be turned off and on according to how people's social credit score is going is deeply attractive to the autocrats of the Western world.
Absolutely. We
And
just saw it with the truckers in Canada.
yeah, or we mentioned it in our last episode, the Mint Press News and certain journalists associated with them, and
Yes.
uh, Caleb Maupin and Geopolitics and Empire podcast. They had their money. It would have been stolen for not the public outcry by PayPal.
That's exactly right. PayPal is also Venmo.
Right. And I would I would say a hearty hear to what you said about this podcast is not trying to make a saint out of China by any means. And I studied Mandarin from junior high off and on through college. I married a woman from People's Republic of China. I'm born and raised in Hawaii, so my natural orientation is to Asia Pacific, not to the
Or
Atlantic.
that's right.
So, I went on a language study tour in Beijing in about 1982. Deng Xiaoping had just come to power, so I've been following China very closely for a while.
Yeah.
And one of their most deeply held convictions is a real profound sense of Han chauvinism.
Hmm.
And the very name Zhongguo, which is how they self-identify, means Middle Kingdom.
Yes.
They see themselves as the center of the universe.
Well, and I believe if I remember the math correctly, it's almost 80% of the entirety of the population of nearly 1.5 billion is directly from the Han roots. Yes?
I think it might be higher. I think it's in the low 90 something percent.
Okay.
So, and they're not the minorities are supposed to have significant autonomy. They don't.
Right.
And you can just look at Tibet or Xinjiang, and what the translation of Xinjiang, which is to the Turks that are there, is called Eastern Turkestan.
Right.
But Xinjiang means new territory.
Yeah.
So this entire uh, western quarter of China is full of Turkic people and is
Yeah.
only newly acquired, which is why they call it new territory.
Yeah.
And China is just piling Han into Xinjiang. They're piling Han into Tibet. And now that they've got a railroad into Tibet, that's
Yeah.
proceeding apace.
And before they started physically showing up, they were flooding it with money.
Yeah, and because I think the chauvinism is at the root of how they treat their client states, even in Belt and Road, on a person-to-person level. And
Yeah.
they bring in their own Chinese laborers to build a lot of this infrastructure.
Yeah.
And I've spent many years in Cambodia, and they have taken over Sihanoukville as a port in Cambodia, and they're laundering a lot of their money into speculative real estate in Phnom Penh. And we should also consider the idea of a debt trap, that oftentimes they build these ports and railroads and such, and if the country that they're building them in can't repay, they just take it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'd like to research that a little bit more to see.
I would like to update myself on the numbers. I think the Italians and Greeks have already put in place deals to start handing ports over to the Chinese for money because they don't trust the Western Bloc to
Yes.
the Greeks have already been placed under great austerity. Why would they not turn away from the EU at this point in Western capital? And the Italians are not far behind. So
Italy and Greece are the only two EU signatories to the Belt and Road Initiative.
oh, got it.
And it is centered around ports because
Well,
the
there it
Belt and
is.
Road, the road part is the maritime Silk Road, China calls it. So they're really keenly interested in ports as well as the gas and oil pipelines that go along railroad, high speed railroad
Yeah,
corridors. So in Greece, they want the Athens port of Piraeus,
yeah,
and in Italy, they want the port of Trieste
that's right.
so that their high speed rails will go right to them.
Yeah,
And I think with all of their Belt and Road countries, they take a very transactional approach to their interaction with those countries that they're going to not. America still speaks of human rights and often does so hypocritically.
that's right.
China just doesn't bother with speaking about it at all. And they are not, well, America's never been hesitant to work with authoritarians, but China doesn't even make noises about working with authoritarians who have bad human rights records because they're pursuing the Belt and Road Initiative on a basis of mutual convenience and transaction.
That's right.
But jumping back to Barack,
Yeah, get into it. I'm going to step away for a moment, but I'll still be able to hear you.
okay, I think his speech telegraphed to big media, big tech, and quote unquote intelligence and academia in no uncertain terms the ongoing and ever intensifying imperative to participate in a sweeping, systematic, and seamless regime of identifying anything counter to the approved narratives undergirding the permanent war and corporate rule led by Wall Street as disinformation. So, any empirical descriptions of the toadies and henchmen of those regimes and any corrections of their assertions have to be ridiculed, marginalized, and suppressed by the political class, big media, big tech, and the bloviating punditocracy as disinformation. And in a future episode of the Hardline According to Stonefruit, and hot off the presses now at stonefruit.substack.com, we'll look at how that strategy is being put into place and Nina Jankowicz's role as a centralizer of that. But for now, let's stick with Obama's speech and let's dip into some quotes from that speech.
Yeah.
I just want to bounce between a quote and then oh my God, I can't believe he's saying it type of call
Yeah.
a little bit. He said, quote, once they lose trust in their leaders, in mainstream media, in political institutions, in each other, in the possibility of truth, the game is lost. Mark, I don't think any American retains trust in their leaders, mainstream media, or political institutions.
I really don't know what planet these people live on, other than the fact that what choice do they have at this point but to straight face double down? So it's, I mean, what they have no other alternative like this. They have to say this. This is the velvet tongue, smooth sounding version of Trump, right? There's no separation there. It is no different. This is just everybody's NyQuil bedtime story to swallow it and go back to sleep.
Yeah, there's force and coercion and there's persuasion.
That's
So
exactly right.
so this is the persuasion end of the spectrum. If they can just get the general public to
And
believe,
coercion. Yeah, that's right.
then they don't have to resort, well, they're not going to stop resorting to surveillance and mass incarceration, which we already have more prisoners than even China, which has 4 times our population.
Yeah.
But here's another perfect quote from the speech. There are still brand name newspapers and magazines, not to mention network news broadcasts, NPR, and other outlets that have adapted to the new digital environment while maintaining the highest standards of journalistic integrity. Ah,
Journalistic integrity meaning they continue to espouse and be stenographers for what we want you to hear.
absolutely. The readers of New York Times and Washington Post and Blue MAGA legacy media, MSNBC and CNN, they all self-identify as Democrats,
Right.
right around 90%.
Yeah.
And
Which is strange for NPR because they've been bought and paid for by the Koch brothers.
yeah, and other foundations with heavy corporate ties. And I mean, I don't think there's anyone that would say New York Times and Washington Post, which used to be respected as relatively nonpartisan back
Yeah.
when there was still a legitimately placed trust in the media, which started
Yeah.
disintegrating in 70s, I'd say.
Yeah.
But those papers are just part of Blue MAGA at this point, and
Well,
NPR too.
yeah, to take it even further, Washington Post is basically just the Jeff Bezos editorial board.
And their motto, "Democracy dies in darkness." Shoot me now.
Yeah.
And NPR. Oh my God. Here's a wine mom, boomer, and shit lib shout out. Uh, NPR, who called universal health care mandatory Medicaid during the presidential 2020 campaign, and who just even recently called the W administration claim for weapons of mass destruction in Gulf War 2.0 the result of faulty intelligence. Nope, no, it wasn't.
No, it wasn't.
No. Anyone that was paying any attention to it knows that it was bullshit then and it's bullshit now.
Yeah.
But for NPR to say that, and I still listen now and then, especially when I'm driving. But oh God, whenever they verge into politics, I want to play Flight of the Bumblebee with a claw hammer on my skull.
Yeah. It is that bad. It's gotten that bad.
And network news broadcasts, those have been irrelevant since CNN put up its shutter in Atlanta back when it was still plausibly real news.
Right.
Network news has not been relevant for decades.
I mean, all you have to do is look at the books of Sinclair, right? I mean, Sinclair owns 2/3 of every single local TV and radio station.
Yeah, and who do we have to thank for that? Biden, who's been integrally
Yeah,
responsible
and
for
Bill
all.
Clinton. Yeah,
And
that's
Clinton
right.
was president, and Biden was the water carrier in the Senate. Biden has been integrally responsible for at least half a dozen of the worst pieces of legislation of the last 30 years.
Yeah, that's
One of them,
exactly right.
one
Hmm.
of them is the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which
Yeah,
centralized ownership to the insane degree we have now.
yeah, and then his bankruptcy act, where he exploded student debt, and you can't file bankruptcy on it. Like he's willing to take the houses of kids' parents after they go into hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt to finish school, and then they don't have a decent enough job to pay for it when they get out.
And the senator of uh, Delaware, the home of all the credit card companies, wrote that you can't expunge credit card debt out of the in bankruptcy either. Repeal of Glass-Steagall, the crime
Yeah,
bill, which has incarcerated hundreds of thousands of black people. It's an extremely racist
Yeah.
piece of legislation.
His own kid would probably be in prison for 20 years if his kid was subjected to the laws that everybody else is subjected to regarding drug offenses.
And quote unquote welfare reform. I mean, all the horseshit legislation Biden is responsible for could be an episode by itself. So we'll just focus
Yeah,
on the
let that one go.
Communication Act here. So when
Yeah.
Obama is mentioning all those outlets by name, what he's really saying is that those are acceptable sources of information,
That's right.
acceptable to our overlords.
That's right.
But he says that this contemporary information overload destroys our ability to judge the truth, which is why we need it curated by a nanny state.
Right.
And now Nina Jankowicz will be our head nanny. And in the things, conspiracy theories, of course, when, as Brother Dark of Post-Orthodoxy mentioned during the telethon a few days ago, that where did conspiracy theory come from? The CIA, as a term that they mobilized into the media, what they call the Mighty Wurlitzer, through Operation Mockingbird, their larger operation to control the media, to discredit anyone who disagreed with the Warren Commission, which is 800 pages of USDA prime lie.
Yeah.
And some other phrases Obama mentioned, junk science and quackery, that we heard those phrases a lot during the pandemic, which then often turned out to be true. Ivermectin, oh my God. And Obama went on to further worry that, quote, over time, we lose our capacity to distinguish between fact and opinion and wholesale fiction. Or maybe we just stop caring. Now, look, with this whole nanny state they want us to submit to, they're denying that America has survived as a major experiment with free speech for well over 200 years. It may be on life support now, but that doesn't mean that we have, quote, lost our capacity to distinguish between fact, opinion, and wholesale fiction.
That's right.
We can, but I would agree, maybe we did stop caring.
Yes.
That's why we're having these diseases of despair.
That's right.
Like alcohol and drug addiction are going rampant. And overdoses hit their highest mark ever last year. 108,000. And on Post-Orthodoxy, the Sackler family came up. This was when they were visiting Hawaii. And someone said, their guest said, oh, we should treat everybody with compassion. And I said in the text, we should not treat the Sacklers with compassion.
Right.
Although, if we can't hang them from the lamppost, to make an example, can we at least get criminal sentences? No, we can't even get that.
Right.
And
yeah, I mean, in the 1700s, speculators were hung from the lampposts, and now it's the name of the game. It's how to get rich. How it's backwards.
These people are committing mass murder with Excel spreadsheets and not even seeing time.
That's right.
And here's a real logic pretzel Obama offered. What we consider unshakable truth today may prove to be totally wrong tomorrow. But that doesn't mean some things aren't truer than others, or that we can't draw lines between opinions, facts, honest mistakes, and intentional deceptions.
Amazing. He gives himself a get out of jail free card.
Wait, if something is true today and totally wrong tomorrow, how are some things truer than others?
Exactly.
And I would posit we can draw the line between opinions, facts, honest mistakes, and intentional deception.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The nanny state is treating us like children,
Yeah.
which, with our education system and the stress of making ends meet in this economy, is perhaps closer to the truth than I might like to believe. But
Sure.
the nanny state they're trying to give us as the solution does not have our best interests at heart. So we could take a quick exact look at Section 230 of the Telecommunications Act of 1996. Section 230C1 does not treat them as a publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider.
Right.
And Section C2 is the no porn for kids clause.
Right.
States service providers and users may not be held liable for voluntarily acting in good faith to restrict access to obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable material.
Mhm.
Harassing bears a closer examination because I think the concern over cyberbullying, which has been going on for 10 or 15 years, was the entering spear point for content moderation.
Sure.
But I think it's those three words, Mark. Otherwise objectionable material.
Otherwise objectionable material, which to them means anything we don't want said openly and repeatedly.
That is the loophole they can drive a Mack truck through.
Absolutely. And it's not an accident that a bunch of multi-millionaire Ivy League lawyers would have stated it that way at that time.
Yeah, that's all the wiggle room they need to content moderate truth and anti-establishment views right out of existence.
Absolutely. They will put that phrase on steroids until it is modified to the way that they see fit.
So I think big tech got the message loud and clear. And it was
Yeah,
a tacit injunction to play ball or expect
that's
changes
right.
to the law, giving them immunity from liability to anticipate lawsuits or changes in the type of data and advertising they can sell. And he mentioned advertising by name. And
Yep.
then he goes into this, it's more like, oh, please, Obama, stop my head. He's with power comes accountability. And in democracies like ours, at least, the need for some democratic oversight. When, as I will reiterate again and again and again on the hardline according to Stonefruit, we are democracy in name only. We're bought and sold by the corporations.
Yeah.
And democratic oversight means that the government will continue to allow them to have extreme latitude as private companies and be lenient on how poorly they have custody over the First Amendment if they give them secret access to their algorithms so that they know that the right people are being censored.
That's exactly right. And then to take it even further, to pretend that the NSA directly and other private firms and NGOs aren't also given access on the backside of what the government is able to acquire is just childish and naive. So and who knows how much money we're spending on that on black budgets. Like they're taking that information, giving it to their minions, and then immediately put it back into the marketplace to clean up whatever they consider a little bit messy.
Yeah, the FBI doing warrantless
Sure.
surveillance as
Yeah,
it was caught a week ago is the tip of the iceberg.
that's right.
And much worse is going on at a massive level and has been for years. I mean, the Snowden revelations get all the attention, but even those are more or less forgotten now. But
Yeah.
there are a number of major NSA whistleblowers that have been saying we have been doing this on a scale that the public can't even imagine. And I'm talking
That's right.
about people like Russell Tice and William Binney. And Will Binney was the former chief technology officer of the NSA.
Yeah, Bill's had no problem telling the truth the last 10 years.
And he said Russiagate was bullshit from the start.
That's right.
He said, all I can tell you is that, well, not all I can tell you, but it would have been impossible for them to extricate the data by means of cyber attack. It had to have been extirpated by a thumb drive or some type of hard drive.
Yeah.
Basic. So just here's the chief technology officer of NSA
Right.
saying that no, it's just technologically impossible for the main theme of Russiagate to be true at all. And
Right.
of course, he never got on MSNBC.
Of course not.
And here's the pithy analogy that Obama made, always keeping it homey.
Of course.
If a meat packing company has a proprietary technique to keep our hot dogs fresh and clean, which of course made me think of Outcast. So fresh and so clean, clean, so fresh and so clean, clean.
Right.
They don't have to reveal to the world what that technique is. They do have to tell the meat inspector. In the same way, tech companies should be able to protect their intellectual property while also following certain safety standards that we as a country, not just them, have agreed are necessary for the greater good.
That's right. We'll give you your rents if you give us the info.
Right.
Right.
Very savvy that he's bringing intellectual property into it.
Yeah.
And you can keep it at our sufferance as long as you play ball.
Exactly.
But I mean, that if you just look empathetically and broadly at that exact example, if some food processor found some breakthrough technology to keep food safe and clean, that should not be allowed to remain intellectual property.
Yeah.
That should be commandeered in the public interest and made
Well,
available to every other food processor in the market.
that's right. Especially the monopolies that we already allow to exist in the food industry specifically.
Oh yeah, and Matt Stoller is my main man for keeping an eye on monopoly, and he's got a Substack channel and he's on Breaking Points a lot. And
Solar is one of the most important, relevant antitrust voices in the country right now.
because it seems like every remaining industry in America is a monopoly,
Yeah.
or at least an oligopoly.
Yeah, that's right.
But in big techs,
Not to mention the oligopsonies that purchase from the oligopolies.
yeah, and the interlocking boards and the hedge funds own all of them. But in big tech's case, they're just too valuable to support the corporatist DNC Democratic smokescreen.
Yeah.
Now, I think for now, big tech is blue MAGA because their employees all donate about 99% to Democrats.
Right. Well, I mean, a lot of them are here on H-1B visas from elsewhere.
Yeah, but I don't think that's going to last forever. I think at the end of the day, big tech is a business and they only care about the bottom line.
That's right.
And the cornerstone of corporate law, Dodge versus Ford, somewhere in the 19 teens, it said that the overriding legal obligation of corporations is to make quarterly profits.
Yeah.
And when Republicans assume power, as I'm sure they're going to get the House and most likely the Senate in the midterms and the
Absolutely.
presidency back in 2 more years,
Yep.
that big tech will then give them control over the approved narratives.
Absolutely.
Corporations who have as their fundamental legal fiction the notion of corporate personhood.
Yeah.
And there was a great book by Joel Bacon called The Corporation.
Yeah.
But even better was the documentary about it. A rare case when the movie's better than the book, because the movie focused just on one aspect of the book.
Mhm.
Okay, if the legal fiction is that corporations are people, it's a fair question to ask, what kind of person are they?
Right.
When that movie came out, we were on the Diagnosis and Statistical Manual 4. We're on 5 now, which is the Bible for psychiatry and psychology to diagnose uh, pathologies. So Bacon went, and the movie in particular went right down the board of the criteria for psychopaths: no concern for others, um, not having a long-term goal, no con-
Right.
being willing to lie and manipulate to get what they want,
Absolutely.
and right down the line.
Well, and Mitt Romney from Bain Capital and a high school about 20 minutes away from mine at Cranbrook, yeah, I mean, he said the quiet part out loud, right? Corporations are people, my friend. So, I mean, corporate personhood has ran as far as it can go. And the writing's kind of on the wall. So during this period of interregnum, it would almost be my position that everybody that has the time and wherewithal flood the corporate, uh, flood the judiciary with lawsuits. Like everybody needs to be a walking S corporation right now. That I mean, really, like you might as well play by their rules because this is the way it's going to be for a long time. And they use the fact that when they're so wrong, you don't have standing in court because you're not a corporation. So anybody that has the time or resource to turn their body into an S corporation and file their actual activity into LLCs connected through LLPs, you should just do exactly what they're doing on a smaller scale. And then as these things bubble up, how can they say you don't have standing if you have followed their rules? But the Mitt Romney corporations are people says the quiet part out loud, and that's really what they think. It's ridiculous that a corporate construct that humans invented would supersede actual human life and being born and existing as a person. It's crazy. It's backwards.
And I forget the exact name of the case, but it was Santa Clara versus somebody in 1880s. It was a
Okay.
case in California that went to the Supreme Court. It was regarding railroads. And
Okay.
that was the case that established corporate personhood. But if you want to get super technical, that was in the headnotes to the case. That was not in the actual opinion itself.
Sure.
So this incredibly foundational notion to corporate law that has spread throughout the world wasn't even in the opinion. It was in the notes surrounding the opinion.
Wow.
So if we take the idea seriously that corporations are psychopaths, then we have to think that all of our political and economic life since capitalism, since the peak of the British Empire in the 1880s till now, is all arranged by psychopaths.
Yeah, that's right.
Everything in politics is economics is been arranged by psychopaths.
That's right.
And that's why we are at this monumental crossroads in history that's not democracy versus authoritarianism, as the powers that be say.
They're happy to use authoritarianism whenever they see fit.
But the fact that we've let psychopaths establish everything
Sure.
is why we're on the brink of, why we're in the midst of the sixth great extinction.
That's right.
Why we are years away from our final chance to do anything about the climate catastrophe.
Sure.
Why every aquifer is gone or polluted.
Yeah.
While we are about to run out of fish in the ocean.
Right.
And why we're teetering on the brink of the collapse of complex civilization.
Yeah.
And on that happy note,
Barack Obama still giving speeches at Stanford.
Yeah, but Obama might not see the worst of it, and we'll get to a collapse episode at some point, but
Sure.
his daughter certainly will. And
Absolutely.
it's just sad because we all love our children and our grandchildren and nieces and nephews, but we're not acting like it because we are destroying the planet.
Yeah.
So Obama is a gold medal, multi-Olympiad gold medal in disinformation.
Agree.
But coming up on the next episode, we're going to have Rookie of the Year, Nina Jankowicz, recently appointed head of the Department of Homeland Security Disinformation Governance Board.
I can't wait to hear what she considers disinformation.
Oh my God. And I remain scarred by her ditty doing a version of supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. So thank you, everybody. This has been yet another episode of Stonefruit, of the Hardline According to Stonefruit, with my man Mark French. Thank you very much.
Have a great day.